lights off. Is it? No.
Oh, it has sorted out. Okay.
Okay. So, hi, good evening. We will be presenting not all the projects that we have done so far, because that would be kind of quite boring, neither all the competitions that we have participated, but somehow a blend between some built small work and some entries of competitions, and some work that is currently on the board and that it will be very soon, hopefully, under construction. So, well, let's start. And also, I would like, I think it's not such a huge audience. I think this would allow us probably to make it a bit more of a conversation. So if there is any point throughout the lecture that someone wants to do a question, I think you can freely do it, and we can develop it a bit more as a dialogue. Okay. So we'll start presenting few exhibition/installation projects that we have done. And this one addresses somehow repetition and is got a meandering strategy, which we call it Elastic Realities for Morelia in Mexico City. We got invited to participate in this poly or multi-sensorial festival, and we were supposed to exhibit our work, which we thought within that context it would have been much more interesting to produce an installation that addresses the specificity of the place where we were meant to exhibit. Whenever you want to interrupt me, because otherwise...
I can.
Okay. So what you see in there is very much the context is a colonial building. The larger grid that you see in the bottom is represents a patio, and a fraction of an internal patio. And when you see on top there is the existing arches sort of gallery that describes that part of the building. What we did is we started to work with the existing geometry of those vaults, and we started to develop a geometry that somehow deals with it and restores the original way in which this space used to work. If you look at the top, those are windows, very small windows that are about 3 levels on top of this bottom side where the opens up to the patio, and those were big openings basically that communicated the level of the street visually and directly into the patio.
So we developed this kind of strategy of folding the vaults basically outwards and in plan to create a meandering system that bridges basically the gap between inside and outside. And this is basically the result that we've done with students of the university in Mexico. And the interesting thing is that it's pink, because pink was really like the cheapest material that we could find there. That like the cloth was really all available, and that makes it kind of quite contextual. Afterwards, we found some like a lot of shops or a lot of like stalls and so on in the street using exactly the same kind of fabric, basically, well, a different type of fabric but the same color. And so the idea is that this basically could replace these steel bars, and it could create like a new type of enclosure that is basically a lot more permeable. At the same time, also proposes new kinds of relationships inside and outside. And there was like a big event where also a group of like theater people were performing in response to this structure.
I think in a way what is interesting about the project is that we had never been there. They hadn't even sent us photographs. They only sent us the floor plans and the 3D model of that space. So very much the approach was completely generated in London, And it was in a way, from that point of view, very much a laboratory approach that had no idea of trying to deal with ephemeral conditions or secondary effects. And what happens is that once it's built, then we realize of all the potential that it unfolded in terms of these ephemeral conditions, such as the shadows, the way in which the space gets painted out of this pink, the way in which it modifies these performance people, how they move throughout the two skins, etc., etc. And in a way, we are still testing with this way of working, in which you produce something and you don't control from the very beginning what is going to be the outcome, but in a way you allow yourself to be always surprised by it.
I mean, it is about sort of how much control do we actually exercise onto the materiality or onto the spatial organization that we produce, and how much we actually leave it open for these other effects or for contingencies to creep in, basically. And this is another example of these experiments that we've done 1 year ago in London, where we got sponsored by Chorus, the sea people that also sponsored the exhibition outside there. So, and they gave us this material for free, which is very, very thin. It's like 0.7 millimeter thick steel. So we developed basically through a lot of cardboard models a configuration that would basically deal with this in a similar way, that would perform in a similar way as the steel does. So the triangulation pattern of equal kind of angle triangles throughout the kind of sheets was punch pressed into the sheets, and that allowed it to kind of crumble in a very controlled fashion. But and then we had to learn sort of techniques how to work with those folds. But then once one knew how to work with it, it was quite incredible how a very, very flimsy, it's almost like cling film, that stuff, could actually become a lot stronger. Or ironically, because one weakens basically the material with this perforation, but one produces this overall kind of global stress patterns.
And then again, the effects that it ended up generating by something that wasn't necessarily meant to be part of the architecture as an outcome, such as all the piercing pattern, sort of surprises us, because all the light that came through produces all this patterning in the ground and onto the surfaces itself. Then on top of these, we had in the opening there was music, and there was a video produced by Douglas Spencer that was projected onto it, and this started somehow as well to disappear the piece in a very funny way, where everything got tinted by the color of the projections and the wording within the projections. That's probably the best example of that, where everything sort of disappears into each other.
Yeah, and now we're just talking about the exhibition. I hope most of you have already seen it, or you'll be able to see it afterwards, which was quite an incredible undertaking. What we've done is, I don't know how many people know about our project of Madrid, which we're going to show afterwards, but we've started by grafting basically this part of that hotel project in Madrid, which was built in there, into the gallery out here opposite, and then kind of basically growing from this graft the fabric to actually to the existing proportions and features of the Georgian kind of front room. So these renderings show more or less the geometry of this. Obviously, the idea was to kind of overwhelm really the kind of character of the room for this period of time, although it at the same time, as I said before, it's kind of contextual in its own way, really. It's a kind of hyper-contextual, really, one could say, and it creates almost this window towards the front, towards the windows, where one can sit around, and from there it becomes increasingly an artificial space with these projections at the other end. So this is the different material systems that we needed to produce in order to achieve that morphology. Yeah, in opposite of the facts of the previous installation, this is really like we had a form basically, and then the material system had to be designed to adapt to the form. Meanwhile, in the previous, it was the other way around. So
I mean, in a way, it's the exhibition that is out here has an approach that is quite conventional from the point of view of having a preconceived idea of what you want to produce, and then you come and you plot it, and then you try to develop some form of a structural support that answers to that form. In this case, due to the complexity of the geometry, it ended up being quite an interesting research in material system. But the difference with the previous one lies on the approach of how you deal with the material, or you deal from the beginning with a preconceived idea.
But as you can see here, the floor panels that obviously have to take the load of the people, which wouldn't be possible without an array of those. Then these are actually the seams that we needed to introduce in addition to the planar kind of triangle sizes, because the sheet sizes of the steel were just not big enough really. So it is really a layering of different systems basically, and that then also and it's also an exercise in how to organize the information really. That what you can see is all the kind of all the numbers basically of the sheet sizes, and they needed to stay kind of connected basically throughout the manufacturing process, which was completely digital, and then needed to be placed in the gallery into the right order and into the right space, and that was sometimes difficult. So here we're seeing the build up. The important thing was to have something that kind of basically forms itself, that has the precision embedded basically, so that one couldn't do it really in a wrong way. So by introducing these, basically we call them boomerangs, pieces that are connecting the triangles. But by that it becomes really like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, and it was kind of, well, I mean, we did it in the end in 2 or 3 days, which was incredible really, and we had a lot of help of lots of people that I would like to thank here. So here you can sort of see the principle of it all, and that became then, and this image, I really like it because it really shows the different logics of what we were trying in relation to the conventional logic that governs the Georgian shell that is housed, and the same here basically. So it is quite a different animal there really.
Okay. So now we'll show a few built projects of the smaller scale, and somehow in each one of the cases we try to develop an association with a larger scale project, basically because we decided to start our practice here in London, and what that meant, at least in our case, is that we started to develop our portfolio with rather small projects. These small projects were not only small, but also mostly interior design, if you want, or I would prefer to call it interior architecture anyway. But what that supposes in our case is that we use each one of those smaller scale projects to explore certain issues that interest us, and that we have somehow brought forward into larger scale entry competitions and so on and so forth.
So it's basically a combination of some really, really simple things and some quite complex or sometimes even complicated ones as well.
What you see in there is a sort of a overall envelope that had originally only the ground floor and a complete height of about 7.5 meters in the top part of the pitch roof. And our client at the time, he wanted the crazy thing of not only working and living in there, which is not crazy at all, but also he is a Tai Chi professor, and he wanted to teach Tai Chi in the ground floor. he's a silversmith, so he wanted to be able of retaining the light in the ground floor so that he could do his jewelry pieces there. And he wanted the space to double potentially as a gallery so that he could exhibit some of the pieces that he produced that are rather small format. The problem that this supposes is that, well, problem or rather potential is that we could not think about discrete spaces that describe very specific activities such as a bedroom or a bathroom or a living area, but rather we had to think about the spaces that somehow in terms of the dimensions would allow for these activities to happen, but would have a continuity among them so that they can also sort of describe a trajectory in the case of when this doubles as a gallery. That is in one hand. In the other hand, the fact of needing to have light coming through sort of pushes towards the idea of starting to work with a continuous surface that, structurally speaking, starts to develop into a spiral, and where the beam that holds the spiral together is this blue system that you read in there, that is just the edge of the spiral, let's say. So it is a balustrade and is also a structural beam. In terms of the materiality, the budget was ridiculously small. I mean, well, it was £12,000 basically. So the material that we decided to use is steel mesh, which is normally used within industrial environments for balconies and pedestrian paths and so on. And one, because of its structural capability of being almost self-supportive. Second, because of the possibility of allowing light through and deflecting the light as well throughout the different hours of the day. But mostly, really, because of the budget.
So, but it becomes this kind of amalgam where structure and surface and occupation and balustrade and everything is basically the same. So it's really like a very, very sculptural, kind of holistic piece.
We sort of on purpose paired it off with this project, which is a competition we've done for an ocean museum in Germany. And the project, in terms of its surface development, describes a very similar strategy as the one that we have just shown, being the only difference that in the only one, well, being the only difference the scale, of course, but besides that, the fact that in the other one we are talking about a spiral or open-ended loop, whereas in this case, being a museum, it describes a continuous and hyperly connected loop.
But at the same time, it's also, this one is also like a window and a kind of, it describes the relationship between the sea and the city, whereas it is carved out in such a way that it creates this void in the middle that is like an open public plaza from where you can kind of see the ocean and vice versa. And from there, basically, you can then, and everything else circulates around that, basically wraps around that the interior of the museum. And so what we needed to do, because it's by the coast, you can't really dig down very much, so, and we wanted to bring people up so that they then afterwards can go down. The idea was for people to go downwards into the exhibition, to then kind of dive really and leave the kind of world as we know it behind and go into this different logics and the different world of the ocean itself. And at the same time, we also leave behind such a kind of like columns and everything that reminds you of gravity. So basically in this space, every walls and ceilings, everything kind of morphs into the same, and there's no real parameter anymore about what's above and what's below and what is left and what is right. And not a single surface is actually kind of horizontal, but everything is on slopes, and that's basically why we didn't win this competition, I think, because I think the Germans weren't quite up for it there.
The Germans
that
are
time.
never quite up for it.
That time they weren't up for it, so, but maybe next time. So this really shows kind of, first of all, going upwards into this. This is the external landscape, then inside the building, and then downwards and meandering around through this. Well, there's a lot of weight coming down from the aquariums that are also located in the top floors. So what we did is, rather than having a lot of columns, we had wall supports and then wrapping the circulation sort of like an intestine around it. And that also makes people kind of lose basically their orientation. And that's what we wanted, that they really don't know anymore where they're located. And that is basically what we understand of being in a museum that talks about underwater world and waves and ocean and all those things. So yeah, this external space would then be illuminated kind of radically at night to again create like the atmosphere of an underwater world. And there's some spatial sequences here. We developed the structure very closely with Arup to also kind of bring a kind of quite holistic approach to these really wide spans, which at places they are actually 60-meter spans. And it becomes really a building that is out of one piece. There's no differentiation between facade, roof, or floor. And
can I just ask you, when
yeah.
you plan to have sort of the projections of images you can see, was that in that previous picture? Is that where you aimed?
You mean
Yeah.
this one, or? No, these are aquariums. You walk through the aquariums, basically, so you have the fish all around it. But that was part of the brief. That's like a new, quite a new thing.
The brief was very, very tough. It was quite specific about what they wanted in terms of the sequences of the spaces, and also in terms of the atmosphere that each one of the spaces should resemble. And it was also very, yeah, I would say a huge amount of square meters for the size of the site. And somehow the meandering strategy with that continuous loop arises from that necessity of really needing to make most of the use of the whole plot.
Yeah, this is a very simple project that we've just executed 2 years ago in East London. It's a very kind of strange floor plan in an old warehouse, ground floor, and it has light at the very top and at the bottom basically only. And the clients, they wanted to live and also to work, and they are video artists, quite experimental people. So what we devised is this system of, where we projected these vectors that tag onto certain features of the surrounding shell, like the doors, for instance, or corners, and it creates this system of interrelationships between them, like all the nodes, wherever, and then we insert these pods that are governed by these vectors, and in that way we produce different kinds of spaces with sliding doors actually in some locations, so that the office can be completely separated from the living room, and then at other times it can be all completely open.
I think what is quite fun about this project in a way is that this is the only floor plan that we have. Actually, this is the only drawing that we have for the whole of the project, because we never got a survey of the floor plan, and we tried few times of doing it ourselves, and we never managed, because absolutely it's a very old building and all the angles are slightly twisted in relationship to each other. The floor is not really flat, but it's got a little slope here and there, meaning is you know, the furthest possible from a clean geometrical figure, if you want. And then we realized that the only way in which we could really approach it with that budget and with that amount of time was to plot basically with threads or with laser beams, if you want, all the main directions, all the main points in situ. And then the only thing that we produced were actually detailed drawings of the smaller scale of the smaller parts within those pieces of furniture. So it really happened as an in situ project, almost like a one-to-one model, perhaps.
And when we did string all these kind of lines onto the floor with string, then, and the client wanted suddenly to have a bit more space in one of those places, then everything else really had to change as well. It was quite a lot of work. So here you can sort of see the character of this kind of openness with these inserted pots as well. And a lot of these furnitures, they take on double functions like storage.
All of them, not a lot
Yeah.
of them.
All of them. This project is then kind of like a development from that strategy, really, where it's very, very strange kind of that we have been approached by these people to do an aquapark in Siberia, really, and it's kind of quite challenging. Well, Siberia, no, there's no penguins there, but it's quite nice how the penguins are kind of located, and there. It's hard to believe that they can actually stay there. But this is basically the inside, and the other thing was kind of the outside. No, you have this extreme kind of climatic conditions.
The project was in a way very specific, because they had a very specific plan of the amount of activities that they wanted, type of activities, the type of sloping routes for doing all sort of tackish activities like in all the aqua centers. But they didn't really have a site. They just said it will be Siberia, or it would be a very, very cold place where there is going to be snow probably 360 days a year. So the client wants to be able of plotting the project almost anywhere. So in a way we had to devise a strategy that would be quite specific formally as to address the activities that are inherent to an aqua center, but at the same time quite an open-ended strategy, or very generic perhaps, so that it could be adapted or readapted to any different site within those constraints. So what we worked with is with the slide before. We use this as a way of developing, or let's say perhaps just selling the idea to the client of what we wanted to do in terms of having a formation within the land that would allow us for different water pockets and other pockets or voids provision where the land comes through it. So in the diagram 1, you can see what we call the natural system, which is what it would arise from the existing topography. And in the second and the third one, there were all the, or the second one rather, all the parking requirements, which huge quantities. And we worked with a grid that would fit this. And we started to morph, let's say, the two systems into what is the third diagram. Then we started to develop some organizational accesses that would influence this structural organization and would start to produce some voids within the overall mesh. These voids, whilst they produce some pockets where the snow will sit, they also produce some main circulation points throughout the building. Those are different variations that we produce to sort of being able of showing that you can have the same concept and the same approach with different open-ended variations that could be adapted to different site conditions along Siberia. Then this is a series of diagrams that build up, showing the different components, let's say, of the overall building.
Yeah, it really becomes this kind of spongy tissue. The interesting thing, I think, is that it really is like an undulating in section. Unfortunately, we don't have a section here. It's really it's a shame, because it's these fingers really that have embedded really the rams and these kind of chutes and so on. They are all kind of embedded in a solid kind of topography rather than floating in space.
That's the other level, and those are a few views from the outside.
And the interior pictures are a bit kitsch, but they're actually not kitschy enough, because we have to produce more for them to show to the clients, because the clients at the moment they don't buy into it.
The capital investor.
Yeah, the Russians.
In between Germans and Russians. Okay.
So this is another really simple project again that we did in London a long time ago. We introduced a meandering wall into this space, which is very similar to the silversmith space. You can sort of follow the grey patches. That is one meandering wall, and it then produces this series of rooms, and it also houses a lot of different functions. Like it houses the window, some shelving, then the cistern of the toilet, then there's like a window between the soundproof and the bathroom, then there's a staircase going up, wardrobe, shelves, etc. So it really is this kind of the meandering kind of making different rooms basically, and then also the lateral kind of change of program that we've explored in here.
It's quite. I think it's the strategy arises similarly as with the silversmith, when you have a very small space and where lots of activities need to be developed in there. How do you approach it so that you don't end up developing a system of discrete parts, that they are all completely different from each other and they're just sort of pasted onto each other? But how can you develop somehow more unifying tectonics that allow for the provision of all these pockets within the space?
So one interesting thing is here, there's two things. One is the step of this little platform here is basically sloping in two directions. So it's kind of a bit of a weird thing to experience really, and that's really like an important thing for us to work with, which is it is very comfortable to use, more comfortable, almost like a really flat one. But if you're really conscious about it, then you're kind of a bit hesitant really, and you feel destabilized. And it's this moment of destabilization really that is really quite important to us. And another one of those is you see that wall is just slightly slanted because the door basically is vertical, and it's these little discrepancies where we work really with the perception and where you can't really say what's actually slanting and what is actually straight.
You're sounding a little bit like Caruso St. John, kind of making a point out of a little thing. But anyway, hopefully those are little things that get extrapolated into larger scales investigations. And this is what we hope that happens in this project. This is a current project that we are working on at the moment. It is located on the red dot up there. This is the South Tyrol, in the most northern part of Italy, and it's surrounded by mountains. It's one of those areas where it turns into a big ski resort during the winter month of the year. Okay. This is the site, and you can see at the end of the photograph little South Tyrolean typical house, which is what the client basically wanted when they first approached us, in that's what it sells. This picturesque sort of a South Tyrolean style is what apparently people want when they go to stay in a hotel in there. So
it's ironic, no? You see those kind of amazing mountains and stuff, and then they expect people to stay in these really kind of terrible interiors that those houses resemble basically. So we're trying to attach ourselves a bit more to the mountain formations in this case.
So we develop a series of grids that address the bedrooms organization, the spa organization, the public area organization, with a continuous band that unites them, and as it moves, it develops into different parts of the project. What you see in there in green is the artificial topography that we developed that starts to discuss a topology that derives, or typology, sorry, that derives more from the morphology of the mountains in terms of its strata organization than from the typical, obviously, South Tyrolean house. In here you can see the green part of it again is where it dips down so that it produces a pocket space to allow for all the spa activities. And what is rendering wireframe is the building with the more hotel type accommodation, basically bedrooms really. And here you can see the glass band that produces the interface between the building and the topography, and it goes around the building to an extent that it starts to sort of meander around the building and produce say becomes the container of the building. So those are different studies of facade systems that we develop with the idea of the continuous bands made out of very thin wooden strips surrounding the building. That's what finally will be, hopefully. Sort of a blending onto the landscape and describing also decking areas for pedestrian use within the landscape too. That's the lobby area. To the right side, you can see how the wooden strips form a band, and they start to turn around and to complete a trajectory that in that case it becomes the greenery outside the building. And then it keeps going down and becomes this funny children's area for ski training. And that's part of the spa, which is embedded within the topography, but yet framing the views of the mountain to the north of the site through the glass.
Yeah, this is a recent project that we've just that we're going to build pretty soon, I hope, and it's a building on top of an existing one, a penthouse for like a couple, and really the diagram of this is like a three-dimensional loop basically that folds onto itself, where it goes from relatively public to increasingly private kind of activities. So the public activities would be like the outside, the terraces where you can sit and you have the view of the mountains. Then there's the living room, which is still kind of semi-public, and then the entrance as well. And then it becomes really like the bedrooms, etc., which are private. Here you can sort of see what I mean by three-dimensional. You can see that the roof basically dips down, and it creates this pocket where you can actually sit on the roof and watch out. And underneath is then the other circulation. So it's this really like three-dimensional intertwining or folding into between private and public, really. And the material system of this has been really developed from the staircase going up on the side. So the rhythm is the rhythm of one step that has then been proliferated, and each section has then been altered specifically to form the space that it encloses. So here you can sort of see a bit out of scale these people kind of using this exterior landscape, and this is the effect that it will have in the inside, where you can really see how the outside kind of creeps into that. Yeah, now we're showing a kind of a recently completed project, which is Hotel Puerta Amrica, which is one floor out of 13, and they have all been given to different architects. So it was quite a good exercise for us to, and also good to be in touch with what other people are doing. And we developed our approach from looking at the rhythms of the rooms, which could not be altered. So everything else was really open, but the overall structure of the building was there with the kind of coarse construction like columns and also service shafts, and we developed that sort of rhythm into a sectional kind of framework.
we wanted to sort of go against the idea of a homogeneous corridor of a hotel, where you normally have the differentiation between a 5-star hotel and a 2-star hotel given only via different type of wallpaper, better pictures, worse pictures, etc., but not really in terms of creating a physical / tectonic differentiation throughout the corridor. So we wanted to kill the homogeneity of it so that people wouldn't really walk through the corridor having a key and looking for the number of their door, but that they would start to associate their room to a certain color, to a certain morphology, so that they would find themselves in a more haptic manner. So to do this, we wanted to work with a smooth materiality, which we decided to work with the stainless steel, and then with a very subtle gradient of colors that in this case was applied with a lighting effect.
Well, in the beginning, this were some images from the we did a competition, and this wasn't really subtle, I think, and we were quite surprised that we actually won this, and the client really went for it. But then we also got a bit kind of scared, so now we have to really build it. So how do we do about these doors that are actually not even vertical, and we had to work quite hard to bring this into a realm that could be constructed really. And there has been a long process really, which was very, very interesting to develop a system out of this. Like we introduced these triangular cuts basically, which negotiate, or they allow some elasticity between the vertical surfaces that are the doors and the undulating morphology. So, and then they became also like light slots that mark the doors. So that was quite a nice kind of progression of the project at that stage. And here you can see the rendering, and here it is how it's now built. Unfortunately, one can't really see the color changing very much in the corridor, but the light seams, which are LEDs, they're basically changing throughout the corridor from one tone to another.
Then we had the 2 wings of the floor plan, and then we had the lobby area, which is the circular point here in the bottom image. And what we wanted to produce is like a knot condition coming from the 2 wings of the end of the floor plan. And this started to generate the idea of a knot / vortex and a form of a geometry of the ceiling dipping down and turning into a seat and into the floor. Those are a few of the models that we did to study the development, sectional development of those 2 wings onto that vortex, as well as the dipping down of the ceiling into the floor. This doesn't want to move.
Stuck or what?
Yeah.
There it goes.
Okay. That's more of a representational model of how we solved that situation.
This is basically the piece that we've then grafted over there in the gallery,
which is the precise moment where it turns from floor into ceiling via the development of a bench.
Yeah, so it's again the idea of like ceiling, wall and floor becoming like one, where you can't discern really where one ends and where the other begins. And this is the piece which has been completely manufactured in one piece. And this is the vortex basically as it is there now in Madrid. This is from the other side. There you can see the lift shafts, and you're basically facing this piece in the middle, and you can go either way around it. And again, a photograph of the corridors.
That is repeated.
Yeah, somehow.
Unfortunately, we didn't get stainless steel sponsor for the exhibition out there. Otherwise, it would have been really nice.
Yeah, it works a bit better, and it's a lot more robust. But then also, it will have to last not 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but hopefully 20 years. So, and the budget was probably also probably, yeah, I would say 100 times bigger really per square meter. So it's quite a different animal. So these are this up there you can see the section of the corridor in the middle, and then how the room basically relates to it. So the room is like reverberances of that corridor, but at the same time it shouldn't have the same kind of artificiality or intensity. It's really a place where you stay for much longer, so it should really kind of not be too demanding.
It was almost like a requirement as well, no? Because the client said, okay, you're going really, really wild with everything, but can you please make sure that the bedrooms are inhabitable? That, you know, that people will want to actually stay in there after we spend all that amount of money.
Yeah, but fair enough. No, you're spending 300 euros, so you want to have a good night's sleep. So, but we still kind of produce kind of we have these effects where the bed is basically running into this kind of sheet of stainless steel, crunching it down a little bit. So there's this relationship of these objects, this index of some sort of intended movement. And all these pieces, they are kind of related to each other in sets of interdependencies, really geometrically, where the ceiling and the bed, they are projected onto each other. This is this piece in the back. And the whole thing gets a bit stuck, unfortunately, so we can't run too quickly through it, unfortunately. No. This is the glass basically between the bathroom and the bedroom, which was kind of quite hard to get it manufactured, but we managed with UV glue. This is the sink. The sink is a really good example for explaining that what we're doing is basically not just expressive, sort of we like it or this is beautiful or something, but it really negotiates the different demands throughout its morphology. Like it needs to have the pipings in this uprising part. It needs to drain the water in that part in the middle, and it needs to be flat basically where you want to put your soap and your expensive perfume and so on, so it doesn't roll away and falls down onto the floor. So, and then one side of it is connected to the door, or it touches the door, so it needs to be vertical. Here you can see, and there's a sheet of glass in front of it. So there's all these different parameters surrounding this, and this piece is basically connecting all these parameters really with each other. So it's here you can sort of see it from the front. It looks like it's touching the glass and it's pushing the glass, but it actually shouldn't do that because then the glass would break. So it needs to be completely self-supportive. So it was quite, when you're there, you can't believe that this thing can actually cantilever in this way, but it does. It's quite amazing because the folds of it underneath are incredibly strong. Yeah, and this is sort of the showing basically the relationships of these different pieces of furniture in a three-dimensional kind of vector field, really, I would say.
In a way, it's a fairly conventional hotel room, or room at least. I mean, the only thing that we sort of challenge is the notion of privacy with the bathroom and the bedroom, where there is a continuous visual connectivity. So either you are a very extroverted couple, or you have to go on your own, but there is no way of having any privacy in no part of the room.
The glass of the bath is also out of the side of the bath is out of glass, so you can see like your partner in section basically lying in the bath. And each of the rooms has the kind of specific color of the corridor, so they're all different, and they have different atmospheres, and because of that. So this is the last project that we're showing tonight, which is a competition that we're getting the result tonight. So wish us luck. And it's for a big library in Germany, and it's also urban reorganization of that context there. Don't know. Do we have? Yeah, this is probably better to start with. It's that sort of backyard situation of this campus. All these buildings around it are basically the university, and this is also meant to reorganize all this. So it becomes this kind of central focus point. And because of that, we wanted the ground floor to be completely public. So the lobby of the library is actually in the first floor, and the ground floor is just this open like passage really, where people can hang out as copy shops and public facilities really. But the actual kind of safety net, so to say, these kind of barriers, they're actually located further up. Let me just go back to this one. Yeah, here you can sort of see the diagram. The landscape has a level change of 3 meters, and that is basically completely translated up in the diagram of the building, whereas you have 2 floors that are 3 meters. It's a split level condition basically, and because of that split level condition, we develop the circulation as this vortex, this helix between that just kind of continuously wraps up throughout the central void. So
that is in terms of the spatial organization of each of the library itself. Now, in terms of more the generative plate of the project, I would say that everything started more or less in here, because they wanted this library to start consolidating all the small bits and pieces of library that they have throughout the campus, as well as becoming the library for the city. And it is located in a site that is, or it's been up to now, sort of a no one's land, but at the same time a necessary cross through for pedestrian fluxes throughout the whole of the site. So what we did is we develop a landscape which with the different degrees of slopes and different heights, it starts to accommodate for these fluxes to keep happening and redirects other fluxes. What you see right now to the top of the image, to the right and the bottom, are the structural legs that come down from the building, and those sort of reaffirm with its location the way in which the fluxes will happen throughout the site. And this was then translated into the organization of that first floor plan and the sort of a public character of that ground floor plan, where you can cross through the library as one of the main floors without necessarily going through the control point.
So it's a little bit like the Tate Modern, which has this big ramp and so on, but it really becomes this kind of crossing through kind of point, and the ramp itself becomes a place to hang out. And then there's another ramp going from the higher kind of platform up, and that becomes actually the access. So, and that wraps then continuously up throughout the building. So here one can sort of see that principle. It's very, very simple actually. And then we work closely with Arab on the structural system. This time that also works well in this respect. It introduces this really forest of columns, but that we see as really a potential for really organizing also the ground floor, the floor plans, wherever those columns kind of pierce the floor plan, and you have these kind of diagonals going through that. You have really areas where more casual activities will happen. And this is quite well developed, the relationship of the ground really to the building. So the building is something is a bit ambiguous. It is floating to some extent, but then it also drops down and integrates into the landscape at the same time. And the same goes for the interior, where this is this kind of continuous loop going upwards throughout organizing the building, and from there onwards the more quiet parts are kind of removed from this kind of central core acoustically away from it.
I think within the brief there was a certain stipulation of the areas that required more silence, and let's say not areas that required more noise, but there was a differentiation between what could be a bit more casual and for meeting areas and so on, and what needed to be really secluded. And this is what we utilize this part of the brief to develop the proximities to the ramp, where of course whatever was closer to the ramp would have a higher degree of noise and casual activities. Whereas whatever stays further out towards this area, becomes the secluded areas within the facade, and the facade being out of glass, then the same furniture and people located within the facade will develop as a form of filtering the light into the more internal parts of the library.
Yeah, this is the kind of final model. Yeah, this is a good example for our intention of like not really trying to do wacky things wherever we can, but we're really trying to do it specifically wherever it's needed. Specifically
areas.
wacky areas where something should happen, which is like the circulation. Yeah, when you go into like some conventional library, you go up somewhere and it's really quite a boring experience, no? Meanwhile, obviously, we register that some areas should really be flat, yeah, but then there's an opportunity for some other areas that might be designed in a different way, yeah, to give this kind of interlude of the daily routine. So the people who go to this library, the ones that are on the top floor, they can really kind of walk through it. They can see everything else, and the walkthrough really becomes that sort of kind of more of a physical experience, really, and a route, and it's a very controlled project, this one. Meanwhile, some other ones they're slightly more experimental. So that's what where we're at this stage, really. We're trying to do different things that, and in a way it's very difficult to lecture about it because everything is sort of connected to everything else, really. That's why we wanted to show you the projects, so you can make your mind up yourself how the things kind of hang together, really. Because it's not really easy to kind of put a taxonomy on them, really, and to say this project is about that project is about this. We always fail to do that somehow.
And that is all for tonight. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to shoot.
Richard.
Thank you. I thought it was very interesting comparing the larger scale and the smaller scale projects, because obviously there's formal similarities. But one of the things that I thought was quite interesting coming out of that was that the smaller scale projects have a kind of human scale of faceting, if you like. The proportions of the pieces relate to the human scale, and obviously in the larger projects, the faceting scales up with the project, and you have much larger components. I just wondered if you envisage the interior spaces of the larger projects having this almost sort of fractal relationship to the outside. In other words, that the intensity of the faceting increases at the smaller scale, and what that relationship might be between those two systems.
Yeah, in an ideal world, you would give that same kind of grain to a really big project, but I wonder if it's actually possible to really kind of have that. I mean, with the that's why it's difficult to say, really, if you can do it budget-wise, really, to kind of, first of all, budget-wise, also like kind of like fees-wise, if you can actually kind of develop that throughout. So maybe there's some other connections that you can also produce that link it in some other way, really, where it's not necessarily about really kind of having that one-to-one design kind of rolled out throughout the whole project, but it's more about that the large scale actually contains certain kind of strategic locations within it that create this kind of network, basically, that brings in the one-to-one in a kind of different, more strategic way, for instance.
I suppose one other possibility is in a lot of the small scale projects you're actually working in an existing shell, and there's a kind of an antagonism, I suppose, between the elements that are faceted and a more conventional kind of external envelope. But in the larger scale, perhaps the smaller scale, it might become more well-behaved, might become rectilinear.
More orthogonal.
Yes, exactly, in relation to the outer shell.
It could be. I mean, to be perfectly honest, since we have not had the opportunity yet of getting a huge project where we can experiment these things, is a little bit like I mean, you must have seen through the presentation. We are not trying to push, you know, these kind of incredible parallelisms between the smaller scale projects and the larger projects. But somehow, as a post-rationalization, when you look at them, you realize that there is a common interest that runs through. But there is, of course, a gap, almost like I wouldn't say a conceptual gap, but a materialization gap between the two scales that we have dealt with. And there is always that question of how these would come about. I mean, in terms of the smaller scale, I wouldn't like to see it as an antagonism, the sort of a fractal development, precisely because we don't see it as a complete alien insertion onto the space, but we see it more as something that geometrically unfolds from within these more orthogonal environments. And it unfolds in ways that might not be too obvious, let's say geometrically speaking, but it becomes very obvious when you start to trying to make more out of the space that you have, and more is a way of stretching the capacity of the envelopes, let's say, no?
No, absolutely.
Does that suggest that we start off with a 3D model and move to a wireframe, or is it not possible? Oh, sorry.
Does that suggest that you move from a 3D model to a wireframe, or doesn't that necessarily happen in that order? Well, to a digital model.
Yeah, we work sort of with physical models and digital at the same time. Often we start with a digital model really, because it's so much quicker really and it's a bit more strategic, I would say. But then whenever it's needed, we bring in a different kind of tool really, and there's lots of things happening at the same time, I would say. That's probably the process. And it's about the translation between the processes where really you spark off and you test basically the validity of your ideas and how they're working, and you get like an input from it as well.
We find more control in deploying the digital modeling than the physical modeling at the beginning of the project, because it allows you somehow to be a bit more constrained in relationship to the parameters that you're working with. But then at some point, you lose yourself a little bit in terms of the scale and in terms of certain potential that the thing that you're working with could generate. And this is the moment in which we start to shift into physical modeling. And we work extensively with physical models, but not as a form of representation of a project. We never show to the clients physical models. Neither. It's too bad, yeah, but anyway. Or we use it more to explore quite specific issues that have more to do with the development of the project. So should we go for drinks? No more questions? Okay, great, thank you.